The dusty main street of Sheridan, Wyoming Territory, fell silent as Katherine Coleman's desperate cries echoed from the doctor's office in the summer of 1876. The stagecoach had departed just minutes before, leaving nothing but swirling dust and a woman's shattered world in its wake. Her trembling hands clutched a crumpled letter bearing the official seal of the Kansas City Orphanage Society, the ink still fresh, the words cutting deeper than any knife. "They'll take my baby," she sobbed, collapsing against the weathered porch railing of Dr. Abernathy's office, her chestnut hair falling loose around her tear-streaked face. "They're coming to claim her in 3 days." The few townsfolk on the street averted their eyes, uncomfortable with such raw display of emotion, but one man stepped forward from the shadows of the general store. Jackson Fletcher stood tall against the setting sun, his weathered face set with determination beneath the brim of his Stetson. "Not while I draw breath," the cowboy replied, his deep voice carrying across the distance between them. His hand rested instinctively on his holstered Colt as he approached the distressed woman. Katherine looked up, her green eyes wide with surprise and lingering fear. She had barely noticed this stranger in town before a quiet, broad-shouldered man who'd arrived 3 weeks prior with a small herd of horses to sell. "You don't understand," she whispered. "You can't help me." Jackson removed his hat, revealing sun-bleached brown hair and eyes the color of a summer storm. "Madam, I don't rightly know your troubles, but I've never been one to turn my back on someone in need." He offered her a handkerchief, clean despite the dust of the trail. "Perhaps you'd care to explain?" Katherine accepted the handkerchief with trembling fingers. She dabbed at her eyes, the cotton coming away smudged with tears. "My daughter," she managed, her voice breaking. "My sweet little Emily. She's all I have left in this world, and they mean to take her from me." Jackson's jaw tightened. "Who means to take her, madam?" "The orphanage in Kansas City. My husband's family." Katherine swallowed hard. After Thomas died in the mining accident last year, his parents have been trying to claim Emily. They say a widow can't provide properly for a child out here, that she belongs with them. "And you disagree," Jackson stated simply. "Thomas never wanted his daughter raised by them. They're cold, calculating people who care more about appearances than love." "They've never even met Emily." Katherine's hands clenched around the letter. "But they have connections, money, the law on their side." Dr. Abernathy appeared in the doorway behind Katherine, a small girl of about 4 in his arms. Emily Coleman had her mother's emerald eyes and a crown of auburn curls. She reached for Katherine, who immediately gathered her close. "Mrs. Coleman has been struggling since her husband's passing," the doctor explained quietly to Jackson. "The mine paid a pittance in compensation, and the Coleman homestead is small, but she's a good mother. The child wants for nothing that matters." Jackson nodded slowly, watching the woman cradle her daughter with fierce protectiveness. Something in their embrace awakened memories of his own childhood, of loss and separation that still haunted him. He cleared his throat. "Mrs. Coleman, I believe we should continue this conversation somewhere more private. Perhaps I could escort you and your daughter home?" Katherine hesitated, studying the man before her. In the Wild West, trusting strangers could be dangerous, but something in Jackson's steady gaze spoke of honor and integrity. "Our place is 3 miles outside town," she said finally. "I have my horse tied at the livery. We can all fit if you don't mind riding double." He offered a gentle smile to Emily. "Would you like to ride a big horse, little one?" Emily nodded shyly, burying her face in her mother's neck, but peering at Jackson with curious eyes. As they rode out of town, Katherine's arms wrapped around her daughter, who sat securely in front of Jackson. She found herself telling him more of her story. How she and Thomas had come west from Pennsylvania 5 years ago, with dreams of building a future. How they'd worked the small homestead, while Thomas supplemented their income with seasonal work at the Silver Creek mine. How the cave-in had taken not only her husband, but their financial security as well. "The in-laws never approved of me," Katherine admitted as they traveled the dusty road. "Called me common. They wanted Thomas to marry a Boston socialite, not a farmer's daughter. When we moved west, they all but disowned him." Her voice hardened. "Now, suddenly they care about Emily's welfare? It's about controlling what's left of their son, nothing more." Jackson listened silently, his thoughts turning over possibilities. The homestead came into view, a modest cabin with a small barn and corral, a vegetable garden struggling in the summer heat, and a few chickens scratching in the yard. It wasn't much, but it was clear Katherine had worked hard to maintain it. "This is home," she said simply as they dismounted. Emily immediately ran to a ragdoll sitting on the porch steps, chattering to it about her ride on the big horse. Jackson tethered his mount and surveyed the property with a practiced eye. "You manage all this yourself?" Katherine nodded, pushing a strand of hair from her face. "I sell eggs and vegetables in town when I can. Take in mending. It's not much, but we get by." Her voice faltered. "Or we did, until this letter arrived yesterday." Inside the cabin, everything was neat but worn, the furniture simple, the shelves sparse but organized. Katherine put on water for coffee while Emily played quietly in the corner with her doll. "The letter says representatives will arrive on Thursday's stage to collect Emily," Katherine explained, her hands shaking as she measured coffee grounds. "They have a court order from a judge in Kansas City. Dr. Abernathy says it might not be valid here in Wyoming territory, but who's going to stop them? Sheriff Davis is old and rarely leaves his office these days." Jackson removed his hat and placed it on the table, running a hand through his hair. "Mrs. Coleman, Katherine, please." "Katherine," he corrected, "I don't pretend to know much about the law, but I do know about standing up for what's right. What these people are trying to do doesn't sit well with me." Katherine placed a steaming cup before him. "Why would you help us?" "You don't even know me." Jackson's weathered face softened as he watched Emily with her doll. "When I was 6, my mother died of fever. My father, overcome with grief, couldn't care for me and my sisters. We were separated, sent to different relatives across 3 states. I never saw my sisters again." He met Katherine's eyes. "No child should be taken from a loving parent." "I'm sorry," Katherine whispered, moved by his unexpected revelation. "It was a long time ago." Jackson sipped his coffee, then set the cup down decisively. 3 days isn't much time, but it's enough to formulate a plan. Do you have any friends, allies in town?" "A few. Mrs. Parker at the boarding house was kind to us after Thomas died, and Reverend Michaels has always been supportive." Jackson nodded thoughtfully. "First light tomorrow. I'd like your permission to speak with them. Perhaps between us, we can find a solution." "What solution could there possibly be? The letter says they have legal custody." Jackson's eyes held a determined glint. "Wyoming territory is still a frontier, Katherine. Sometimes justice out here takes different forms than back east." For the first time since receiving the letter, Katherine felt a flicker of hope. "You truly believe you can help us?" "I don't make promises I can't keep," Jackson replied solemnly. "But I give you my word, I will do everything in my power to ensure you don't lose your daughter." That night, after Katherine had put Emily to bed in the small adjoining room, she sat on the porch steps beside Jackson. The Wyoming night spread vast and star-filled above them, the distant howl of coyotes carrying on the wind. "Tell me about Thomas," Jackson said quietly. "What kind of man was he?" Katherine's face softened in the moonlight. "Kind, hard-working. He had big dreams, wanted to build Emily a proper house one day, with glass windows and a picket fence." She brushed away a tear. "He was nothing like his family. They have wealth, but Thomas valued simplicity and honesty above all. And his parents? What are they like?" "Cornelius and Margaret Coleman," Katherine said, the names leaving a bitter taste. "Boston aristocracy, or so they believe. Cold, judgmental. They offered Thomas money to leave me before we married." She laughed without humor. "When he refused, they cut him off completely. Yet now they want his child," Jackson mused. "They want their legacy, their bloodline. Emily is just a possession to them." Katherine wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "I'd rather take Emily and flee into the mountains than let them raise her." Jackson considered her words carefully. "Running might be an option, but it's no life for a child. Always looking over your shoulder, never putting down roots." "What choice do I have?" she asked desperately. "Let me see what I can discover in town tomorrow. There may be options we haven't considered." He stood, stretching his tall frame. "I'll sleep in your barn tonight, if that's agreeable. Don't want to cause talk among your neighbors." Katherine nodded, grateful for his understanding. "Thank you, Mr. Fletcher." Jackson, he corrected with a small smile. If we're going to fight this battle together, we might as well use our Christian names. Dawn found Jackson already awake, saddling his horse, as Katherine emerged from the cabin with a basket containing fresh bread and preserves. "It's not much," she apologized, "but you should eat something before you ride to town." Jackson accepted the offering gratefully. "This is a fine breakfast, Katherine, better than trail biscuits and jerky." He ate quickly, watching as Emily appeared in the doorway, rubbing sleep from her eyes. The little girl regarded him with curiosity rather than the fear she'd shown yesterday. "Mama says you're helping us," she said plainly. Jackson knelt to her level. "That's right, Miss Emily. Your mama and I are working together." "To make the bad people go away?" Jackson glanced at Katherine, who nodded slightly. "That's the plan," he confirmed. "You just stay with your mama today. I'll be back before sundown." In Sheridan, Jackson's first stop was the telegraph office. He sent 2 messages, one to a lawyer he knew in Cheyenne who specialized in territorial law, and another to a former ranger he'd ridden with in Texas, who now worked as a U.S. Marshal. Next, he visited Mrs. Parker at the boarding house, a motherly woman who clucked with concern when she heard about Katherine's situation. "Those poor dears," she sighed, wringing her hands in her apron. "Katherine's been working her fingers to the bone to keep that child fed and clothed. To think they'd separate them now." "Do you know if anyone in town might have connections in Kansas City?" Jackson asked. "Someone who might know about the Coleman family?" Mrs. Parker thought for a moment. "Mr. Finch at the bank might. He corresponds with Eastern establishments regularly, and Judge Wilson visits from the county seat on Fridays. He might know if that Kansas court order holds weight here." Jackson's next stops were the Reverend Michaels, who promised to rally spiritual support, and Sheriff Davis, who proved as useless as Katherine had suggested, elderly, disinterested, and unwilling to get mixed up in family disputes. At the bank, Mr. Finch proved more helpful. "The Coleman name is familiar," the banker admitted after Jackson explained the situation. "Banking family, I believe. Old money from Massachusetts that expanded west after the war." He frowned, adjusting his spectacles. "If they're who I think they are, they have considerable influence, Mr. Fletcher. Fighting them won't be easy." "I'm not looking for easy," Jackson replied. "Just possible." By mid-afternoon, Jackson had gathered enough information to form the beginnings of a plan. He purchased supplies at the general store, coffee, flour, sugar, and other necessities that Katherine might need, and started the ride back to the Coleman homestead with a clearer purpose than when he'd left. He found Katherine mending clothes on the porch while Emily played with a kitten in the yard. The domestic scene stirred something in Jackson's chest, a yearning for the kind of home he'd never had, a feeling he quickly pushed aside. "You've been busy," Katherine observed as he unloaded the supplies. "Mr. Fletcher, I can't accept—" "Consider it an investment in our cause," he interrupted gently, "and I thought we'd agreed on Jackson." Inside, he spread a map of Wyoming territory on the table and outlined what he'd learned. "Your in-laws are indeed powerful, but they have weaknesses. For one, their court order was issued in Kansas, not Wyoming territory. Judge Wilson arrives in Sheridan tomorrow, and he may be willing to issue a temporary stay until the matter can be properly heard." Katherine's hope visibly rose. "So we could delay them?" "Possibly, but delay only buys time. We need a more permanent solution." Jackson tapped the map. "I've sent for legal advice from Cheyenne and reached out to a U.S. Marshal I trust. If either responds favorably, we'll have more options." "And if they don't?" Jackson met her gaze steadily. "Then we fight with what we have. Mrs. Parker and Reverend Michaels have already agreed to testify to your character and ability as a mother. The doctor, too. If necessary, we create enough of a legal tangle that the Coleman family decides you're more trouble than you're worth." Katherine's eyes widened at his determination. "You've thought this through more thoroughly than I expected." "I don't do things halfway," Jackson replied simply. They spent the evening strategizing further. Emily, sensing the intensity of their discussion, crawled into her mother's lap and eventually fell asleep there, her small face peaceful despite the storm brewing around her. "She trusts so completely," Katherine whispered, stroking her daughter's hair. "She has no idea her world might be torn apart in 2 days." Jackson watched them together, his resolve strengthening. "It won't come to that," he promised quietly. "Get some rest, Katherine. Tomorrow will be a busy day." Morning brought a response to one of Jackson's telegrams. The lawyer in Cheyenne confirmed that interstate custody orders were complicated in territorial law and suggested requesting a territorial hearing before surrendering the child. It wasn't much, but it was a starting point. "I need to return to town," Jackson told Katherine after sharing the news. "Judge Wilson should arrive on the noon stage. I want to speak with him before he hears other versions of the situation." "I'm coming with you," Katherine insisted. "Emily, too. The judge should see us together, see that she belongs with me." Jackson couldn't argue with her logic. They hitched Katherine's old wagon, and the three set off for Sheridan, Emily chattering excitedly about the trip to town, blissfully unaware of its significance. The main street was busier than usual when they arrived, the stagecoach having just delivered not only Judge Wilson, but also the weekly mail and a traveling salesman. Jackson helped Katherine and Emily down from the wagon, conscious of the curious glances from townsfolk who'd rarely seen the widow in the company of a man since her husband's death. "Judge Wilson usually takes rooms at the hotel and then visits the sheriff's office," Katherine explained in a low voice. "We should try to intercept him before the sheriff mentions anything about my situation." They spotted the judge, a distinguished man in his 60s with white side whiskers and the sturdy build of someone who'd known physical labor before the law, heading toward the hotel. Jackson stepped forward to intercept him. "Judge Wilson, sir, my name is Jackson Fletcher. I was hoping for a moment of your time on an urgent legal matter." The judge paused, eyeing Jackson and then Katherine and Emily behind him. "Is this an official petition, Mr. Fletcher?" "It concerns the welfare of a child, Your Honor. We believe there may be a jurisdictional question regarding a custody order from Kansas." Interest flickered in the judge's shrewd eyes. "Very well. Let me get settled, and I'll see you at the sheriff's office in 1 hour." As the judge continued to the hotel, Katherine squeezed Jackson's arm. "He's willing to listen. That's a start." "Indeed it is," Jackson agreed, though he knew gaining an audience was only the first hurdle. "Let's get something to eat while we wait. Emily looks hungry after the ride." At the small cafe near the general store, they shared a modest meal, Emily delighting in the rare treat of a slice of pie. Katherine tried to maintain composure, but Jackson could see the strain in her eyes, the way her hands trembled slightly as she helped Emily wipe berry juice from her chin. "Whatever happens," he said quietly, "remember that you're not alone in this anymore." Katherine met his gaze, surprise and something deeper flickering in her expression. "Why are you really doing this, Jackson?" Most men would have walked away from a widow's troubles. Jackson considered his answer carefully. "I told you about losing my family as a boy. What I didn't say was how it shaped me. I drifted for years, never belonging anywhere, until I realized that helping others find justice gave me purpose." He smiled faintly. "Or maybe I just can't abide seeing a good woman and an innocent child treated unfairly." Their eyes held for a long moment, something unspoken passing between them, before Emily's cheerful voice broke the spell. "More pie, Mama, please." The hour passed quickly. At the sheriff's office, they found Judge Wilson already installed behind the desk, Sheriff Davis dozing in a corner chair. The judge gestured for them to sit, his expression neutral but attentive. "Now then, Mr. Fletcher, Mrs. Coleman, Your Honor, Katherine Coleman. This is my daughter, Emily." The judge nodded. "I understand there's some question about a custody order." Katherine explained her situation, her voice growing stronger as she described her life with Thomas, his death, and her in-laws' sudden interest in Emily. Jackson added what he'd learned about territorial jurisdiction, presenting the telegram from the Cheyenne lawyer. Judge Wilson listened without interruption, occasionally making notes. When they finished, he sat back, fingers steepled before him. "This is indeed a complex matter, Mrs. Coleman. Interstate custody disputes aren't uncommon, but they're rarely simple." He studied Emily, who was contentedly drawing with a pencil stub on a scrap of paper. "The child appears well cared for, certainly." "She is, Your Honor," Katherine affirmed. "We may not have much, but she has everything she needs: love, security, continuity. The Coleman family in Boston would argue they can provide material advantages you cannot," the judge pointed out. "Better education, social connections, financial security." Jackson leaned forward. "With respect, Judge Wilson, Those things mean little compared to a mother's love. Furthermore, Mrs. Coleman's husband explicitly wanted his daughter raised here, away from his family's influence. Do you have documentation of that wish, Mrs. Coleman? A will, perhaps? Catherine's face fell. No, Your Honor. Thomas never formally wrote a will. The mine accident was unexpected. The judge sighed. That complicates matters. Without clear testamentary intent, the courts often favor blood relatives, especially those with substantial resources. But Emily is my blood too, Catherine insisted, her voice breaking. I carried her, birthed her, have raised her every day of her life. How can some distant relatives who've never even met her have more right to her than I do? Judge Wilson's expression softened slightly. I understand your distress, Mrs. Coleman. Here's what I can do. When these representatives arrive tomorrow, I can issue a temporary stay order, preventing them from removing your daughter from the territory until a proper hearing can be arranged in the territorial court in Cheyenne. Hope blossomed in Catherine's face. You would do that? It's within my authority to ensure due process. However, he cautioned, this is merely a delay, not a final decision. The Coleman family will undoubtedly engage legal counsel, and you should be prepared for a difficult fight. We understand, Your Honor, Jackson responded, and we're grateful for the opportunity to present our case properly. As they left the sheriff's office, Catherine's relief was palpable. A stay order! That gives us time to build a proper case. It's a start, Jackson agreed, though his mind was already racing ahead to the next challenges. But the representatives will still arrive tomorrow, and they won't be pleased with the delay. We need to be prepared. They spent the remainder of the day gathering written statements from Dr. Abernathy, Reverend Michaels, and other townsfolk willing to attest to Catherine's character and capability as a mother. Mrs. Parker even offered to accompany them to the stage arrival the next day, lending the moral support of a respected widow. That evening, back at the homestead, Emily was put to bed early, exhausted from the excitement of the day. Catherine and Jackson sat at the kitchen table, papers spread before them, planning their next steps. If we can delay them long enough, Jackson mused, perhaps we can find evidence of Thomas's wishes regarding Emily's upbringing. Did he ever write letters to friends or family members that might mention his desires for her future? Catherine's eyes widened suddenly. Letters! Jackson, there might be something. She hurried to a small wooden chest in the corner, retrieving a bundle of papers tied with faded ribbon. Thomas wrote to his younger sister occasionally, the only member of his family who didn't shun us. She married a banker in Denver last year. They pored over the letters together, shoulders almost touching as they searched for anything that might help their cause. In one dated just 3 months before Thomas's death, they found their first real hope. I thank Providence daily that Emily will grow up breathing free Western air, far from the stifling conventions and hollow values of my parents' world. Margaret, you've seen how their wealth has hardened them against genuine feeling. I would sooner see my daughter raised in honest poverty than in their cold mansion. Catherine's hands trembled as she clutched the letter. This is it proof of his intentions. Jackson placed his hand over hers, steadying her. It's powerful evidence, Catherine. This could make a significant difference. Their eyes met over the letter, and for a breathless moment, the small kitchen seemed charged with something beyond their shared purpose. Catherine became acutely aware of Jackson's proximity, the warmth of his hand on hers, the quiet strength in his gaze. She drew back slightly, confused by the sudden flutter in her chest. We should prepare these for the judge, she said quietly. Jackson cleared his throat, withdrawing his hand. Yes, of course. We'll make copies of the relevant passages in the morning. The night passed restlessly for both. Catherine checked on Emily repeatedly, watching her daughter's peaceful sleep and imagining the heartbreak of separation. Jackson kept vigil from the porch, scanning the moonlit landscape and considering contingencies should their legal strategy fail. Morning dawned clear and crisp. They prepared in silence, the tension mounting as the hour of the stagecoach's arrival approached. Emily, dressed in her best pinafore, sensed the gravity of the occasion and clung to her mother's skirts. Remember, Jackson said as he helped them into the wagon, no matter what these people say or do, we have Judge Wilson's assurance of a stay order. Emily isn't going anywhere today. Catherine nodded, drawing strength from his certainty. I'm ready. Sheridan's main street was unusually crowded when they arrived. Word had spread about the impending confrontation, and townsfolk lingered near the stage depot, curiosity thinly disguised as regular business. Mrs. Parker joined them immediately, patting Catherine's hand and giving Jackson an approving nod. "Judge Wilson is at the hotel having breakfast," she informed them. "He said he'll come as soon as the stage arrives." The wait was excruciating. Katherine held Emily close, whispering reassurances, while Jackson stood protectively beside them, his posture alert, eyes constantly scanning the street. When the distant rumble of the stagecoach finally reached them, Katherine's grip on Emily tightened. "It's going to be all right," Jackson murmured. "Stand your ground. Show them your strength." The stagecoach thundered into town, horses lathered from the final push, wheels raising dust that momentarily obscured their view. As it came to a stop before the depot, an expectant hush fell over the gathered onlookers. The first to descend was a tall, austere man in an expensive Eastern suit, followed by a younger man carrying a leather document case. Both looked distinctly out of place in the frontier town, their clothing unmarked by travel dust, thanks to the protection of the coach. "Mr. Coleman," Katherine whispered to Jackson. "Thomas's uncle, not his father. And that must be their lawyer." The third passenger surprised them both. A woman in her 30s, elegantly dressed but with a countenance that suggested fatigue rather than haughtiness. She glanced around the town with undisguised interest rather than the disdain Katherine had expected. "Margaret," Katherine breathed in disbelief. "Thomas's sister?" Before Jackson could respond, the older man spotted Katherine and Emily and strode purposefully toward them, his companion hurrying to keep pace. "Mrs. Coleman," he announced formally, as though addressing a court rather than a person. "I am Elias Coleman, acting on behalf of Cornelius and Margaret Coleman, Sr. I have come to execute this court order for the custody of Emily Coleman." He gestured for the lawyer to present the document. Katherine lifted her chin, one hand protectively on Emily's shoulder. "Mr. Coleman, I'm aware of your intentions, but you should know that Judge Wilson of the Territorial Court has agreed to issue a stay order until this matter can be properly heard in Cheyenne." Surprise and annoyance flickered across Elias Coleman's face. "I assure you, Mrs. Coleman, this order is entirely legal and binding. No frontier judge has the authority to countermand it." "That's where you're mistaken, sir," came a new voice as Judge Wilson approached from the direction of the hotel. "In matters concerning residents of this territory, I do indeed have such authority." The lawyer stepped forward, presenting his credentials. "Your Honor, I'm Howard Mercer, representing the Coleman family of Boston. This custody order was issued by Judge Thornhill of the Superior Court of Kansas and is recognized across state lines under the full faith and credit clause." "I'm familiar with the Constitution, Mr. Mercer," Judge Wilson replied dryly. "I'm also familiar with territorial statutes that require proper hearings before a child can be removed from the custody of a natural parent. Mrs. Coleman has presented evidence suggesting her late husband explicitly wished his daughter to be raised here, not in Boston." "What evidence?" Elias Coleman demanded, his composure slipping. Katherine stepped forward, Emily still clutched to her side. "Letters written by Thomas to his sister, stating clearly that he never wanted Emily raised by his parents." At this, the well-dressed woman who had hung back approached them. "Uncle Elias, perhaps we should discuss this privately. The child is obviously distressed by all this." Confrontation. She smiled gently at Emily, who was indeed watching the proceedings with wide, fearful eyes. Jackson moved subtly closer to Katherine, his presence a silent promise of protection. "The judge has made his position clear, Mr. Coleman. No one is taking Emily anywhere today." Elias Coleman's face darkened with anger. "And who exactly are you to interfere in family matters?" Before Jackson could respond, Katherine answered firmly. "Mr. Fletcher is a friend who understands the value of keeping families together rather than tearing them apart." Judge Wilson intervened before tensions could escalate further. "I suggest we continue this discussion in a more appropriate setting. Sheriff Davis has offered the use of his office. Mrs. Coleman, Mr. Fletcher, Mr. Coleman, and Mr. Mercer, if you would accompany me." "Mrs. Parker, perhaps you could watch over the child during our discussion." Mrs. Parker stepped forward immediately. "Of course, Your Honor. Come along, Emily dear. I have some fresh cookies at the boarding house." Emily looked uncertainly at her mother. Katherine knelt to her level. "It's all right, sweetheart. Go with Mrs. Parker. Mama will come for you very soon. I promise." As Mrs. Parker led Emily away, the younger woman, Thomas's sister, approached Katherine. "Mrs. Coleman, Katherine, I'm Margaret Coleman Bennett. We've never met, but Thomas wrote to me about you and Emily. I wonder if I might join this discussion. I believe I have relevant information." Katherine studied her sister-in-law's face, searching for duplicity, but finding only sincerity. "Yes, of course." In the sheriff's office, tensions ran high as Elias Coleman and the lawyer presented their case. The elder Colemans, they claimed, could provide Emily with advantages Katherine never could: the finest schools, cultural refinement, social connections that would secure her future. "Mrs. Coleman is a woman alone in a dangerous frontier," Mercer argued smoothly. "Her financial situation is precarious at best. The child's grandparents can offer stability, education, and the lifestyle befitting a Coleman." "The child's name is Emily," Katherine interjected fiercely, "not the Coleman heir. And she has stability, the stability of her mother's love, her home, and the community she knows." Jackson, who had remained silent through much of the exchange, finally spoke. "Judge Wilson, I think we're overlooking something fundamental here. Thomas Coleman chose this life for his family. He rejected Boston society in favor of the freedom and honest values of the West. Shouldn't his wishes for his daughter's upbringing carry significant weight?" Margaret Bennett nodded vigorously. "That's precisely why I'm here, Your Honor. My brother was explicit about not wanting our parents to raise Emily if anything happened to him. He believed their values were corrupting." Elias Coleman scoffed. The fanciful notions of a young man rebelling against his upbringing. Cornelius and Margaret Sr. have only Emily's best interest at heart. "Then why have they never once attempted to meet her?" Katherine challenged. "Not after her birth, not for her birthdays, not even after Thomas died. Their first communication was this court order." Judge Wilson raised his hand for silence. "I've heard enough to confirm my initial assessment. This matter requires proper consideration by the territorial court. I am issuing a stay order prohibiting the removal of Emily Coleman from Wyoming Territory until a hearing can be conducted in Cheyenne. That hearing will be scheduled for 3 weeks from today." "3 weeks!" Elias Coleman exclaimed. "This is preposterous. We cannot remain in this outpost for 3 weeks." "That is unfortunate, Mr. Coleman, but the law requires due process," Judge Wilson replied firmly. "You are, of course, welcome to return to Boston and send legal representation for the hearing." The lawyer leaned in to whisper urgently in Coleman's ear. After a heated whispered exchange, Coleman straightened with obvious displeasure. "Very well. We will abide by your ruling for now, Judge Wilson. But be assured we will prevail in Cheyenne." As they left the sheriff's office, Margaret Bennett lingered behind. "Katherine, might I speak with you privately? There's more you should know." Katherine glanced at Jackson, who nodded encouragingly. "I'll retrieve Emily from Mrs. Parker and meet you back at the wagon," he offered. Once alone with her sister-in-law, Katherine braced herself for further conflict. Instead, Margaret took her hands in a gesture of unexpected warmth. "First, I want you to know, I had no idea my parents were pursuing custody until after they had initiated legal proceedings," Margaret explained earnestly. "I would have warned you had I known. Thomas loved you deeply, and he adored Emily." "Then why are you here with them?" Katherine asked, confusion evident in her voice. "To stop them?" "If I can," Margaret replied. "My parents, they've never recovered from Thomas's decision to leave Boston. Taking Emily is their way of reclaiming what they believe should have been their legacy." She hesitated, then continued in a lower voice. "There's something else you should know. My father is ill, a heart condition. The doctors say he has perhaps a year. My mother is using this as justification for their urgency, but I believe it's made them desperate to secure what they see as their family's future." Katherine absorbed this information slowly. "I'm sorry about your father's health, but that doesn't give them the right to take my child." "I agree completely," Margaret assured her, "which is why I have a proposal. Let me stay in Sheridan until the hearing. I want to get to know my niece, and I think my testimony about Thomas's wishes will carry more weight if I can speak to the loving home you've provided for Emily." Katherine studied the woman's earnest face, so like Thomas's in certain angles. "Your parents and uncle won't approve." "Let me worry about that," Margaret smiled. "I've been managing my parents for years. Besides, I'm a married woman now. They have less influence over me than they once did." When Jackson returned with Emily, he found Katherine and Margaret in seemingly friendly conversation. The little girl regarded her aunt with shy curiosity, especially when Margaret produced a small silver locket from her reticule. "This belonged to your grandmother, my and your father's mother," she explained, fastening it around Emily's neck. "Your father would want you to have it." Emily touched the locket with wonder. "Thank you," she whispered. As they prepared to leave town, Jackson helped Katherine onto the wagon seat, their hands lingering in the exchange. "Margaret has offered to stay in Sheridan until the hearing," Katherine explained quietly. "She wants to support our case." Jackson assessed the well-dressed woman, who was now arranging to take rooms at the boarding house. "Do you trust her?" "I believe I do," Katherine replied thoughtfully. "She has Thomas's eyes, and from what I can tell, his honesty as well." The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of preparation. Jackson rode to Cheyenne once to consult with the lawyer who had telegraphed him, and once to file additional documents supporting Katherine's case. Each time he returned to the homestead, he found Katherine and Margaret growing closer, united by their shared love for Thomas and Emily. Margaret proved to be nothing like her parents. She delighted in the simplicity of homestead life, insisting on learning to collect eggs and churn butter. She shared stories of Thomas's childhood with Emily, keeping his memory alive through tales that made the little girl giggle with delight. Meanwhile, Elias Coleman and the lawyer remained in Sheridan, staying at the hotel and making occasional appearances around town, clearly uncomfortable with frontier accommodations. They made one attempt to visit the Coleman homestead uninvited, but retreated when they found Jackson there, splitting wood with his sleeves rolled up, determination evident in his powerful swing. As the date of the hearing approached, Jackson found himself spending most evenings at the Coleman home, helping with repairs, discussing strategy for the coming legal battle, and simply enjoying the growing sense of family that surrounded the modest cabin. He realized, with a mixture of surprise and contentment, that he'd stopped thinking about moving on, about the next town, the next job, the next solitary campfire. One evening, after Emily had been tucked into bed, and Margaret had retired to the small room they had prepared for her, Jackson and Katherine sat on the porch steps, watching the stars emerge. "I received word from my friend in the Marshal's service today," Jackson said quietly. "He'll be at the hearing to speak on your behalf. His testimony about the importance of family bonds and frontier development carries weight with territorial judges." Katherine nodded, drawing her shawl closer against the evening chill. "Everyone has been so kind. I never expected such support." "You've built a life here that people respect," Jackson replied. "That counts for something in these parts." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the nocturnal sounds of the prairie washing over them. Finally, Katherine spoke the question that had been lingering between them for days. "What will you do after the hearing, Jackson? When this is all resolved?" He considered the question carefully, aware of how much rested on his answer. "That depends." "On what?" Jackson turned to face her, moonlight illuminating his earnest expression. "On whether there might be reasons for me to stay." Katherine's breath caught. "I thought you were a man who never settled in one place." "I was," he admitted. "Until recently." Their eyes held in the darkness, unspoken possibilities stretching between them, like the vast Wyoming sky. Katherine was the first to look away, uncertain of the emotions stirring within her. "It's getting late," she said softly. "We should rest. Tomorrow will be busy." Jackson nodded, respecting her need for distance. "Good night, Katherine." The day of the hearing dawned clear and cool. They traveled to Cheyenne, as a group Katherine, Emily, and Margaret in the wagon with their belongings for the overnight stay, Jackson riding alongside on his horse. The territorial capital was larger and more developed than Sheridan, with proper government buildings and a bustling commercial district. The courthouse intimidated Katherine with its formal grandeur, so different from the simple sheriff's office in Sheridan. Elias Coleman and the lawyer were already there, looking confident in their expensive suits. To Katherine's surprise, they were joined by a distinguished-looking elderly couple, Cornelius and Margaret Coleman, Sr. had made the journey after all. "They came all this way," Katherine whispered to Jackson as they entered the courtroom. "They must be truly determined." "Or truly desperate," Jackson replied, eyeing the elderly man's pallor and the way he leaned heavily on a silver-headed cane. The hearing was more formal than Katherine had anticipated. A territorial judge presided, listening to arguments from both sides with impassive attention. The Coleman family's lawyer presented their case, first emphasizing the family's resources, social position, and ability to provide Emily with every advantage. Cornelius Coleman himself testified briefly, his voice weak but his demeanor commanding. "My granddaughter deserves the Coleman legacy, the education, the connections, the opportunities that are her birthright. Her father's unfortunate choices should not deprive her of her proper place in society." When Katherine's turn came, she spoke from her heart rather than from prepared statements. She described her life with Thomas, their dreams for Emily, and the community they had built in Sheridan. She presented Thomas's letters to Margaret, reading aloud his explicit wishes regarding his daughter's upbringing. Jackson testified about the strength of character he'd witnessed in Katherine, the loving home she provided despite limited means, and the importance of honoring a father's wishes for his child. His presence steady, reliable, principled seemed to impress the judge, who asked several questions about his background and experience. The most surprising testimony came from Margaret Bennett, who spoke eloquently about her brother's rejection of their parents' values and his happiness in the life he'd built with Katherine. "Your Honor," she concluded, "I love my parents, but they view Emily as a possession to be molded, not a child to be nurtured. My brother would be heartbroken to see his daughter taken from the mother he adored and the home he chose." Throughout the proceedings, Emily sat quietly beside Mrs. Parker, who had accompanied them to help with the child during the hearing. The little girl's behavior, polite, well-mannered, clearly secure in her mother's love, spoke volumes about Katherine's parenting. After all testimony had been heard, the judge announced he would consider the matter overnight and render his decision the following morning. As they left the courthouse, Katherine felt drained, uncertain whether their heartfelt pleas had outweighed the Colemans' imposing legal arguments and social standing. They spent the night at a modest boarding house, Emily sleeping between Katherine and Margaret, while Jackson took a room across the hall. No one slept well, anticipation and anxiety keeping them awake long into the night. Morning brought them back to the courthouse, where the judge entered with solemn purpose. The room fell silent as he prepared to announce his decision. "In the matter of custody regarding Emily Coleman," he began formally, "I have carefully considered all testimony and evidence presented. This case presents complex questions of parental rights, family obligations, and the best interests of the child." Katherine clutched Jackson's hand beneath the table, drawing strength from his steady presence. "While the court acknowledges the substantial resources and advantages offered by the Coleman family of Boston," the judge continued, "it cannot overlook the clear and documented wishes of the child's father regarding her upbringing. Furthermore, the court finds no evidence of inadequate care or circumstances that would justify separating a child from her natural mother." Hope blossomed in Katherine's chest as the judge continued. "Therefore, it is the ruling of this court that primary custody of Emily Coleman shall remain with her mother, Katherine Coleman, in accordance with both natural law and the expressed desires of the late Thomas Coleman." Katherine barely suppressed a sob of relief as the judge added, "However, recognizing the child's right to know her paternal family, the court grants visitation rights to the Coleman family to be exercised during summer months for a period not exceeding 3 weeks, beginning when the child reaches the age of 6, provided such visits do not interfere with her education or well-being." The Coleman family's lawyer immediately began whispering urgently to Cornelius, whose face had darkened with anger. Margaret Bennett, however, was smiling through tears, clearly relieved by the compromise. Outside the courthouse, Elias Coleman approached Katherine, his expression rigid with barely controlled fury. "This isn't over, Mrs. Coleman. My brother will appeal this decision to higher courts." Before Katherine could respond, Jackson stepped forward, his voice low but firm. "Mr. Coleman, your family has been granted generous visitation rights more than many would consider, fair given their previous lack of interest in Emily. I suggest you accept the judge's wisdom and focus on building a relationship with your grandniece rather than continuing this destructive legal battle." Cornelius Coleman, looking suddenly older and more fragile than before, placed a restraining hand on his brother's arm. "Enough, Elias. The girl stays with her mother." He turned to Katherine, pride still evident but tempered with resignation. "You have won, Mrs. Coleman, but I expect you to honor the visitation arrangement when Emily is of age." "Of course, Mr. Coleman," Katherine replied with dignity. "Emily deserves to know her father's family, despite our differences. Thomas would want that." Margaret embraced Katherine warmly. "I'll write often, and perhaps visit again before returning to Denver. Emily should know she has family who care for her, on both sides." As the Colemans departed, Emily ran to her mother, unaware of the significance of what had transpired, but sensing the relief in the adults around her. "Are we going home now, Mama?" Katherine lifted her daughter into her arms, holding her close. "Yes, sweetheart, we're going home." The journey back to Sheridan was considerably lighter in spirit than their outward trip had been. Margaret traveled with them, having decided to spend another week at the homestead before returning to Denver. She and Katherine spoke animatedly about plans for the future, their shared love for Thomas, bridging what might otherwise have been an insurmountable social divide. Jackson rode beside the wagon, occasionally catching Katherine's eye and sharing a smile that held new meaning after the trials they had faced together. The connection between them had deepened through their shared battle, evolving from mutual respect into something neither was ready to name, but both increasingly cherished. Upon their return to Sheridan, they found the town buzzing with curiosity about the outcome. News of the Coleman family's defeat spread quickly, and Katherine found herself the recipient of congratulations and good wishes from people who had previously barely acknowledged her existence. That evening, after Margaret had retired and Emily was asleep, Katherine and Jackson once again found themselves on the porch steps under a canopy of stars. "I can hardly believe it's over," Katherine said softly. "For so long, I've lived with the fear that they might take her from me." "You fought for what matters most," Jackson replied. "That's something to be proud of." Katherine turned to face him fully. "I couldn't have done it without you, Jackson. You stepped forward when no one else would. You gave us hope when I had none left." "You had the strength all along," he insisted gently. "I just helped you find it." The night air seemed charged with possibility as Katherine gathered her courage. "You never answered my question properly about what you'll do now." Jackson's gaze remained steady on her face. "I think you know the answer, Katherine. If you want me to stay, that is." "As what?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Whatever you'll have me as," he answered honestly. "A friend, a partner, more, if you're willing." Katherine's hand found his in the darkness. "It's too soon to speak of love, perhaps. Thomas has been gone barely a year." "I'm not asking for declarations," Jackson assured her. "Just permission to stay, to help with the homestead, to be part of your lives while we discover what might grow between us." "Emily adores you," Katherine said, a smile warming her voice. "Almost as much as I've come to value your presence." Jackson's thumb traced gentle circles on the back of her hand. "Then I'll stay, for as long as you'll have me. We have time, Katherine, time to build something real." "Something lasting," she agreed, leaning slightly closer. Under the vast Wyoming sky. With the promise of tomorrow stretching before them, Jackson Fletcher and Katherine Coleman shared their first tentative kiss, not a passion born of desperate circumstances, but a gentle affirmation of possibilities yet to unfold. Over the weeks that followed, Jackson gradually moved his belongings from the town's boarding house to the Coleman homestead, taking up residence in the small cabin Thomas had begun building for storage before his death. With skilled hands, he completed the structure, adding a proper roof and the floor, transforming it into suitable living quarters that maintained propriety while allowing him to be close to Katherine and Emily. Together, they worked the land, repairing fences, expanding the vegetable garden, adding to the small herd of cattle Jackson purchased from a neighboring rancher. The homestead flourished under their combined efforts, as did the tentative relationship blooming between them. Emily thrived with Jackson's steady presence, delighting in the stories he told around the evening fire and the small wooden toys he carved for her during quiet evenings. She took to calling him Mr. Jack, a name that brought a smile to his face whenever she used it. Katherine watched this growing bond with mixed emotions, joy at her daughter's happiness, gratitude for Jackson's patience, and occasional twinges of guilt that Thomas was fading in Emily's young memory. On these occasions, Jackson seemed to sense her thoughts, gently encouraging her to share stories of Thomas with Emily, ensuring the child knew the father who had loved her so deeply. Letters arrived regularly from Margaret in Denver, keeping them informed of Cornelius Coleman's declining health and, more encouragingly, of his apparent acceptance of the custody arrangement. She wrote of plans to visit the following summer, perhaps bringing her husband to meet the family she had discovered so unexpectedly. As autumn painted the countryside in the gold and crimson, Jackson and Katherine's relationship deepened beyond friendship into a love neither had anticipated finding. They moved cautiously, respectful of Thomas's memory, and mindful of the example they set for Emily. But the connection between them was undeniable to anyone who saw them together. On a crisp October evening, with harvest complete and the homestead prepared for the coming winter, Jackson asked Katherine to walk with him to the small rise overlooking their property. The setting sun bathed the landscape in warm light as they surveyed what they had built together. "I remember the day I first saw you," Jackson said quietly, "standing on the doctor's porch in Sheridan, looking like your world had ended. I never imagined then that helping you would lead me home." Katherine's eyes shimmered with emotion. "Is that what we've become to you? Home?" "You and Emily are the only home I've known since I was a boy," he confirmed, taking her hands in his. "Katherine, I know it's only been a few months, and I promise to give you time, but my feelings have only grown stronger with each passing day." She squeezed his hands, her voice soft but certain. "As of mine, Jackson." Encouraged, he continued, "I'm not asking to replace Thomas, no one could. But I'm asking for the chance to build a future with you and Emily, to be a husband to you and a father to her, if you'll have me." Katherine's smile was radiant despite the tears gathering in her eyes. "Emily asked me just yesterday if you were going to be her papa now. I think she's been hoping for this longer than either of us realized." Jackson's expression brightened with hope. "And what did you tell her?" "That it was a question for you to ask, and for me to answer." Katherine moved closer, her hands rising to frame his face. "My answer is yes, Jackson Fletcher. We would be honored to build that future with you." Their kiss sealed the promise, tender yet filled with the certainty of love, hard-won and deeply valued. As they walked hand in hand back to the cabin where Emily waited, the setting sun cast their shadows far across the land. They now shared two separate silhouettes merged into one, moving forward together into whatever tomorrow might bring. Spring arrived the following year, painting the Wyoming landscape with wildflowers and new beginnings. The small church in Sheridan was filled to capacity as Jackson Fletcher and Katherine Coleman exchanged vows, Emily standing proudly between them in a new dress sewn by Mrs. Parker. Margaret Bennett had traveled from Denver for the occasion, bringing not only her husband but also letters of congratulation from the elder Colemans. Perhaps not wholehearted approval, but at least an acknowledgement of the new family being formed. "I never expected to find this," Katherine whispered to her new husband as they shared their first dance at the modest celebration afterward. "After Thomas died, I thought my heart had closed forever." Jackson's arms tightened around her waist. "Some doors close so others can open," he replied, wisdom gained through his own years of wandering. "Thomas brought you west, gave you Emily, taught you strength. In a way, he led you to me." "And you to us," she agreed, resting her head against his shoulder as they swayed to the fiddle music. Emily darted between the dancers, her laughter rising above the music, the silver locket from her grandmother catching the light as she moved. When she tired, Jackson scooped her up, holding her between himself and Katherine in a circle of family that had been forged through adversity and strengthened by choice. In the years that followed, the Fletcher Coleman homestead prospered, expanding into a respectable ranch as Jackson's knowledge of horses and cattle proved valuable in the growing Wyoming territory. Emily grew into a spirited young woman with her mother's strength and her both fathers' sense of adventure and integrity. The promised summer visits to the Colemans began when Emily turned 6, though Cornelius lived to see only the first such visit before his passing. These annual journeys east became educational experiences rather than the battles Katherine had once feared, with Margaret ensuring her niece experienced the best of Boston culture without the suffocating expectations that had driven Thomas away. 2 years after their marriage, Katherine gave birth to twin boys Thomas Jackson and William James Fletcher, who grew up hearing stories of the brave father they never knew, alongside daily lessons in courage and kindness from the father who had chosen them. Later came a daughter, Sarah Margaret, who inherited her mother's chestnut hair and her father's steady determination. On summer evenings, the family would often gather on the expanded porch of their now comfortable ranch house, watching the sun set over land that had witnessed their struggles and triumphs. On one such evening, as their 10th anniversary approached, Katherine found Jackson standing alone, gazing toward the distant mountains. "Penny for your thoughts, cowboy," she said softly, slipping her arm around his waist. He smiled down at her, the years having added silver to his temples, but none of the restlessness that had once defined him. "Just thinking about promises kept," he replied, drawing her close. "About a frightened woman on a porch steps, a little girl who needed protecting, and words spoken from the heart, not while I draw breath." Katherine's eyes softened with memory and gratitude. "You've kept that promise 1,000 times over, Jackson. We built something beautiful from those desperate moments." From inside the house came the sounds of their children's laughter. Emily at 16 helping her younger siblings with some game or project, her voice confident and kind. The sound wrapped around them like a blessing, a testament to what could grow from courage and commitment. "I'd make the same promise again," Jackson said, pressing a kiss to Katherine's temple. "Every day, for the rest of our lives." As twilight deepened into night over the Wyoming plains, the stars emerged one by one above the Fletcher Coleman Ranch, silent witnesses to a love story, written not in grand gestures, but in daily acts of faith, in promises made and kept, in a family forged through the willingness to stand against any threat with the simple, powerful declaration, "Not while I draw breath."